Okay. Well, welcome to our first week of Advent, first day of December. Super excited to be kind of walking through this season with all of you. I don't know about you, but I'm really actually looking forward to Christmas and just really looking forward to the season of Advent. I think there have been some years that maybe this season has felt really stressful or I don't know, maybe not as joyful. And maybe that's true for you this year. But I kind of feel like if ever there was a year that we needed Advent, 2020 is the year that we need Advent. So I'm kind of happy that we're able to do something kind of midweek or early week and just maybe a little bit different. So, so anybody know what the word Advent means? What are we actually celebrating? Ooh, Rebecca.
What do you think? What does Advent mean? You just got excited and put your hand up. Okay.
Well, let me ask you this, Rebecca. Who are we getting ready for, Rebecca? Who are we getting ready for? Who's coming? And it's not Santa Claus. Who's coming at Christmas?
Who's born at Christmas time?
Birthday.
Baby who?
Jesus.
Say it.
Baby Jesus.
Baby Jesus.
Baby Jesus. That's right. That's exactly right. Rebecca, that's spot on. So we are preparing for the arrival of baby Jesus, of Jesus. And so the word Advent actually means coming or arrival. So that's what we're preparing for. But it's not just a season about preparing for Jesus's arrival as a baby. It's not just about Christmas. The season of Advent is also about preparing ourselves for Jesus's return. So the last Sunday of the church year is actually, it wasn't just this past Sunday when we started Advent, but the Sunday before. And the last Sunday of the church year is Christ the King Sunday. And it's a Sunday that we make this really big deal about how Jesus is King and is kind of King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So that's how we end the year. And then we start the year on the first Sunday of Advent. And we start with this reminder that Jesus came as a baby, but is also coming again. And when Jesus comes again, he comes as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So it's a both and the season of Advent, which we kind of lose the second part sometimes. Because everywhere we go, all we see is Christmas stuff. And so we have a tendency to just kind of focus on the preparing for Jesus's first Advent. But the season is actually about both. So why do we celebrate it? Why, kind of where did it come from? The church has been celebrating Advent since early days. Believe it or not, though, Christmas and Advent weren't the primary festivals. I know they kind of are for us now. But if Christmas isn't the primary church festival, what might be the primary church festival that would have been the biggest deal in the church in the early days? Anybody know? If it's not Christmas, it must be
Easter.
Easter, that's right. That's where we get all of our CNEs, right? Our Christmas and Easter folks, kind of the two big holidays. But in the early years of the church, Easter was the biggest, just the biggest celebration. And it was at Easter that everybody who had been preparing to be baptized, it was at that kind of Easter vigil at midnight on Saturday night, they would be baptized, so that on Easter Sunday morning, they'd be able to join as a full member of the congregation. So mid 300s, early 300s, Constantine comes along and declares Christianity the religion of the empire. And I know this seems really irrelevant for our study of Advent, but I promise it makes sense. But Constantine kind of comes along and declares Christianity the religion of the empire. And all of a sudden now it's not just cool to be a Christian, it's also now safe to be a Christian. So before Constantine had done that, it was a very dangerous thing. You were likely to be persecuted and even killed for being a Christian. But after Constantine kind of declares Christianity to be the religion, the faith of the empire, they have a lot more people who want to be baptized. And so they couldn't get everybody in at Easter. And so they decided that next holiday, kind of that next big feast day of the church was kind of the Christmas season. And so Advent became this time of preparation, preparing the folks who would be baptized on Christmas Eve. Advent became that season of preparation. So in the same way that Lent was the season of preparation for Easter, Advent became that preparation time for Christmas. It doesn't really sound like that anymore, right? Like we have a tendency to kind of jump straight into Christmas a little bit more. And I think that's okay. I think we need a little bit more Christmas than sometimes the church calendar lets us have. There's some kind of key words for Advent. Arrival, preparation, expectation, longing, yearning. We think about people like Elizabeth and Mary we hear about their pregnancy stories, like they were waiting for their babies to be born. So that's part of the story of Advent. And in the same way, we as the church are waiting for Jesus to return. So there's that same kind of sense of longing and expectation and hope. So what are the colors of Advent? Anybody know what colors we kind of usually use at Advent? What colors are our, Ellen's got red. Is that red? Is it red? You're muted.
It's either red or purple.
Red or purple. Okay. So red and purple are those are both correct answers. Other colors that we might see during Advent.
Pink and purple for the Advent count.
Pink and purple. Yep. Any white. Yep. There's one other one. It's very important. My mom should actually get this one.
Blue.
Right. What color, what shade of blue? So Sherry's clear, Duke blue. That's right. I'm just picking on you, Sherry. But royal blue is another color that often appears in Advent. So, so why all these colors and which is the right one? Well, we have a tendency in kind of mainline Protestant churches in the US, we have a tendency to use purple and pink are mostly purple. Pink shows up on the third Sunday of Advent. It's the Sunday we talk about joy, and it's based on the Latin word Gaudet Sunday. So it's all about the joy of the shepherds and joy of the coming of Jesus. And so we mark that like we're almost there. So it's that third Sunday of Advent is the pink candle. Some churches you might just see 4 purple candles, and that's fine too. Other churches have a tendency to use the color blue. It's a sign of royalty. It's also the color of the night sky. So we think about a lot about stars, right, in the season, and the idea of the star that helped guide the shepherds and also the wise men. We think about that night sky. And using the color blue helps kind of distinguish the season Advent from the season of Lent, right? Because at Lent we use a lot of purple. So you might see kind of either or of those. But Ellen mentioned the color red, and believe it or not, I always thought that Advent candles and the color of Advent was purple until last year about this time. I was in Germany with some friends, and we were walking around kind of seeing all the Christmas markets and all the churches decorated for Advent. And if I can get this to share, I'll show you what. Can y'all see that? That's what their Advent wreaths look like. So bright red candles. I've got another one, I think, that I can show you. And they were just absolutely beautiful, but it felt kind of strange that the colors of these candles were red and not purple. but apparently that's true all over. That's actually a pretty common thing outside of the US, is to see these red candles. And maybe if you were to visit a Catholic church, even here in the US, or a church that has, I don't know, maybe roots that were a little less American, you might actually see those red candles. So all that to say, when we start talking about making your own Advent wreath, guess what? Any color goes. You don't have to scrounge around to find just the right shade of purple or just the right shade of blue or whatnot, because really any of those colors would work. And if all you had was green candles, then that would work as well. I actually saw somebody post a picture on Sunday of their Advent wreath, and believe it or not, they had, I don't know whether it was a dark purple or whether they were all the way kind of black candles. But it was probably one of the prettiest Advent wreaths I've ever seen. And no, I don't know, maybe before 2020, I wouldn't have thought that black candles on an Advent wreath would look pretty, but they really did. So when we talk about making an Advent wreath, it doesn't have to be purple. So where do we get Advent wreaths from? And that's maybe a little bit newer of a tradition. So the idea of having an Advent wreath didn't start until the 1800s. And there was a German minister, Johann Heinrich Weikern. I probably totally butchered his name, but he was a Protestant pastor in Germany in the 1800s. He was what we would have called a home missionary. So he worked with inner city kids and poor families and whatnot, trying to kind of spread the good news in different parts of the country that maybe weren't being reached by a traditional church. So very similar to some position, a home missionary that we would think of today. And when he was working with kids, he found that they kept asking, how long until Christmas? How long until Christmas? Ellen, have you heard that question yet? How long until Christmas? Never hear that question, right? Like as kids, we never ask that question. How long? How much longer until Christmas? And so Johann actually created the idea of an Advent wreath to help mark really the countdown. So how funny is that it was the idea of kind of kids and expectation and hope and longing and all these things that we talk about at Advent. He embraced that for these kids and helped kind of create this symbol for them to help mark the Sundays and kind of how it got closer. And so he used a wreath, a circle with 4 kind of big candles to mark the 4 Sundays of Advent. And then he actually, in between the big candles, he put little candles to mark kind of the everyday thing. So the idea of, some people might use an Advent calendar, right? That would start today, December the 1st, and you kind of open every door. If you're lucky, your Advent wreath has chocolate or something fun kind of inside each door when you open it up, a little treat. And so that builds expectation as we move toward Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. That's very much something that kind of comes from this home missionary pastor who was helping children in his parish embrace this idea of longing and expectation. So there are lots of different ways to mark the season. How many of you have an Advent wreath in your home right now? Anybody? Nope. Yep, Mom's got one. All right, well, good. I'm going to show you how you can make some. So I have my coffee table here kind of full of some. So I don't know if you can see my the one in the center of the table is kind of my traditional Advent wreath. It's got the 3 purple candles, and the white candle in the center is the Christ candle. We light that one on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and throughout kind of the season of Christmas. I've got maybe a slightly less traditional one that is 4 candles in this little kind of Bethlehem scene. The cool thing about this one is you can take these candles out, and they're just plain votive candles. There's nothing particularly fancy. They happen to be the pink and purple, but they don't have to be. And then the other kind of fun thing is you can use something like floral, just wreath. This actually comes from my home church. Mom let me have hers. They gave these away at church. So you would use just a plain old, it looks like it's made out of a florist, like a styrofoam florist wreath that they've glued some moss and some other kind of greenery on it. And they actually just use plain white candles. Nothing fancy, dollar store specials right here for plain candles. And what they did was give out little pieces of paper, little pieces of tissue paper that could be, or ribbon, that can be wrapped around each of the candles. So if you wanted to mark them as purple or pink, you could just use little pieces of ribbon. Again, so there's no reason to kind of go around and search all over to try to find the right shade of purple or the right shade of blue or something like that. So they just use plain white candles, and their Christ candle is just a simple kind of white candle, or you can use a white pillar. There's no reason why you can't just use plain white candles. 4 of these, 4, 1 for each of the 4 Sundays in Advent, and 1 as a Christ candle works just as easily. Let's see. Oh, I brought sorted through mom's stuff at home while I was home for Thanksgiving, and have created my own little German style Advent wreath with using red candles this time. I just have it on a simple tray. You can use greenery. Why might we use greenery in our Advent wreath? Anybody know the symbolism? We have a tendency to use evergreens at Christmas. Why might that be? What would that evergreen symbolize? How about the idea that God is always and ever shall be and always was? And so the idea of this evergreen, this thing that never fades. So that's why we have a tendency to use a lot of evergreen around this season. And if you notice the shape of an Advent wreath, we usually put them in a circle. Why might we put a wreath, not just because a wreath is a circle, but why might we use a wreath at Advent, a circle? Does the circle have a starting point or an end point?
Yeah. It never ends. God's
never
love
ends. Exactly. So that's part of the symbolism in using an Advent wreath, is using that kind of never-ending, evergreen. All of those things are great symbols for the season. There's another kind of cool tradition, and this is what, if you got our crazy video that we made yesterday in the church kitchen with Ruth and Lee and I, we made these Advent spirals, and we made them out of salt dough, which is just a really easy recipe. It's 2 cups of flour and 1 cup of salt and 1-ish cups of water. Good job. Ellen and Rebecca are holding theirs up. You guys did a great job with these. So you just you make up the dough, you knead it for a little while. We taught Lee how to knead yesterday. So that was fun, but you knead it for a little while, and then you can form it in a spiral. And if you see, there are 25 kind of little holes, and I've made them so that I could use a little pebble. But I've also kind of put some extra holes in it so that I can use, and it's literally just a birthday candle, a fancy little birthday candle. And so I can move this candle kind of across. So for every day, so today is the first day that I would use this candle, and I can start that and move along. If you heard Pastor Michael's sermon on Sunday, he talked about the journey and how Advent was a journey. And so I love this kind of spiral tradition because it really gives us that sense of journeying toward, and if you want to get creative, you could put a bigger candle in the center, or you could decorate this with evergreens or something like that. So another kind of great, easy way that we can mark the season. I think it's really important for us to have these kinds of things. We see them at church. That's wonderful. But of course, 2020, we don't always get to be in church. And so this is a great year for you to create some Advent traditions in your own home, because you don't have to be at church to have an Advent calendar or to have an Advent wreath. You can create your own and use it to mark the days. And so if you wanted to, when you do your daily devotions, you can kind of light the candle for the week that we're on, and kind of watch the candlelight grow. Watch, fluffy dog tails or small kids or something like that. Logan would have to probably watch Louie and Trevor's big fluffy tail, the same as I would with Winnie, but kind of use it. And I mean, heck, get the little battery operated candles if you want to as well, and then everybody in your family can participate. So it's a great idea and a great kind of way to mark the season and to think about how it's a season of preparing and expectation and hope, and how that builds as we get closer and closer to Christmas. Any questions or comments? Anybody have an Advent wreath or candle or something that they want to show off or share?
I have an Advent calendar, but I have to go get it. Just a minute.
Okay. I want to bet that Nancy's has chocolate in it.
I had a question about Advent. When you were talking about Advent and Lent, comparing them, I know that a lot of religions, or well, not religions, but like denominations, don't recognize Lent like we do. But does everybody recognize Advent?
It's probably like Lent, one of those seasons that has a tendency to get lost. The funny thing about us is we don't do fasting or preparation or a slow kind of building type season. We don't do that well. No. That's true, not just of Methodists, that's true of kind of every denomination, right? We don't do these kinds of seasons very well. And so both the tradition of Advent and the tradition of Lent, sometimes they get lost. And Advent in particular was the season that got lost out of the church year, really for a good portion of kind of the 1800s and 1900s. And it really wasn't until the 1950s and really into the 1960s that within the Methodist Church, Advent started coming back into like our book of worship or our hymnal. So the hymnal that we use in church right now is from the 1980s, I think I have that right. And it has a lot of Advent songs in it. And they're lovely. They're some of the best songs in all of our hymnal. And, we hardly ever sing them. We sang two this past Sunday, which was really great to hear. Come Thou Long Expected Jesus, which was written by Charles Wesley. And then O Come Emmanuel, which is probably the most well-known, at least in our tradition, kind of Advent song. But there are lots of others. So if you have a hymnal at home, or if you can you're welcome to grab one from the church. Just kind of take a look through those Advent songs. They're really wonderful. But it really wasn't until this kind of last hymnal and this last really kind of new edition of the book of worship, and I say new, it's not that new, right? But that Advent kind of started coming back, and we've started to kind of reclaim it. And like I said, I think this is a great year to reclaim Advent. And so if you don't have Advent traditions in your family or in your home, this is a really great year to kind of claim that as a season of hope and longing, and also joy. there's some great joy that's embedded in this. Like, Jesus is coming. Jesus came. Jesus took on flesh and became one of us to be with us, to be God with us. And there's great joy in that. But there's also great joy in the fact that Jesus is coming back as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And that's a bit of good news in this year in particular. Nancy, did you have
this is my Advent calendar. He's got a little Santa Claus. He's got a little package here, and you open it up and you can take on a magnet and put it on the date. And because I am who I am, I eat a chocolate kiss every day. So that's my Advent thing.
That's right. That's awesome. That's great. I just think it's really fun for us to be able to kind of mark these days and to think about how we're marking them. Other questions or comments, things you want to share? Yes, Rebecca.
All right, go ahead.
A Christmas tree.
A Christmas tree. That is a great way to prepare for the season. That's great. What shape is a Christmas tree in, Rebecca?
What shape?
What shape does it make?
A triangle.
Triangle. And where does the triangle point?
Where's it point?
To the ceiling.
To the ceiling?
Yes.
Well, what's beyond the ceiling? When we point up, sometimes who are we pointing to?
The sky.
Sky? What's beyond the sky?
What's up in the sky? Where's Gramps? Where's Gramps? Oh.
Are we thinking about heaven? Maybe?
Yes, I was asking her where her Gramps was, because that's where, and she said quietly, he's in heaven.
Right. So a Christmas tree points towards God. So when we look at that triangle, it points us towards God. That's what all of our signs and symbols are supposed to do, from wreaths or candles or spirals or trees. They're all signs and symbols that it's not the spiral that's important. This is flour and salt and water. There's nothing fancy about it. These are just candles, but they take on meaning and they help point the way towards God. And that's really neat. So your Christmas tree is a really great way to help kind of point the way and point us towards God. All right. Y'all ready for a short devotion and an Advent prayer? Okay. All right. So from my reading today, I started with chapter 1 in Luke. I don't know if you knew this, but there are 24 chapters in the Gospel of Luke. So if you read one chapter of Luke a day between now and Christmas Eve, you'll have finished the entirety of Luke's Gospel. Luke is a good one because Luke gives us the Christmas story, unlike Mark or John. Matthew gives us a different version of the Christmas story, but Luke's is probably the one that we know the best. But also Luke just kind of fits nicely into that 24 days heading into Christmas. So I was looking at Luke chapter 1, but I'm also reading through the book of Psalms, and today happened to be Psalm 1, kind of starting over. And so I want to share this verse from Psalm 1 and then talk a little bit about one of the characters, the Christmas characters that we meet at the beginning of Luke's Gospel. So Psalm 1 says this: "Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, and who don't stand on the road of sinners, and don't sit with the disrespectful. Instead of doing those things, these people love the Lord and the law of God, and they recite God's law day and night. They are like a tree planted by a stream of water that bears fruit in its season." I was thinking about that line, and it's a line that I hadn't really paid attention to. It's not just about bearing fruit. We talk about that a lot, right? That if you have the Holy Spirit within you, you're bearing fruit. But this says they're like trees that are planted by streams of water that bear fruit in its season. And so in the beginning of Luke's gospel, we don't start with Mary. We don't really even hardly start with Jesus. We start with Zechariah and Elizabeth. And they were older and they didn't have any children. And Zechariah was a priest who had a chance to go and be in the Holy of Holies. He was taking his turn, doing his priestly duties. And it's there that he meets the angel Gabriel. And you can read for yourself how that encounter goes. Let's just say that Zechariah had one too many questions for Gabriel. And he walked out of that encounter not able to speak for a little while because Gabriel was tired of Zechariah's cheekiness, I guess. But it's from that Gabriel says to Zechariah, you and your wife Elizabeth are going to have a baby. And he says, we're too old for that. And we've heard that before. We've heard that with Abraham and Sarah. We heard it from one of the earliest stories in scripture, like we're too old for that. But sure enough, Elizabeth bears a child, and that child's name is John. But I was thinking as I was reading through John's gospel about this idea of bearing fruit in its season. And Zechariah and Elizabeth were two that waited and waited and waited and hoped and longed for. They probably experienced a lot of regret and disappointment in their waiting. Waiting wasn't easy for either one of them. Elizabeth actually references how she was disgraced because she hadn't born a child. And so we think about a couple like them and how they waited and hoped and longed for God to bear fruit in their lives. And it comes in just the right season. It comes on God's timing and kind of in that right season. So when we're thinking about Advent, we think about how we wait and we hope and we long, and we do experience disappointment and frustration and maybe even anger. But we keep hoping and we keep focusing on God and knowing that and hoping that our fruit will come to season when it's the right time, when it's God's time, in its right season. So that's something to think about for us in this first week of Advent. So I'm gonna light 2 candles tonight, one on the spiral and one on my Advent wreath. And I want to share this reading. The first Sunday in Advent is often called the candle of hope. And so tonight we're going to light that first candle. So if you have an Advent wreath in front of you and you want to light a candle, that would be great. If not, then this is something you can think about as you create your own in your home. So we'll light this candle of hope and this candle for the first Sunday of Advent. And hear these words in this prayer. We light one candle for hope, because the world is broken and the wait is long, but hope just won't let go. Hope holds space for all our longings, lingers on the edge of harsh reality, like the dawn gently awakening the sky. Keep awake, she whispers, for the world is being made new. So we light one candle because it only takes one. Christ is with us. Amen. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. I hope that you will join us next week, that we can get together next week. Next week, we're going to make a Christingle, which is a fun little activity that comes from the UK. Surprise, surprise. But I had a friend who shared it with me just a few weeks ago, actually, at a Messy Church training. And I want to be able to share it with you. So I'll send out that supply list soon. That supply list is going to look a little weird. Just trust me. I promise. the orange and the fruit snacks and the ribbon and the candle will make sense when we put it all together. All right. So I will see you guys next week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Johanna.
Thank you.
Thank you.